Namaste and welcome everyone to this live stream. Today, our guest is Robert Spencer and Vibhuti Jha. And as you know, Robert Spencer is specialist on Islam, and we are going to talk to him about the impact of Ram Mandir over general Islamism all over the world. I can just refer you to a talk that he had with David Wood, in which this topic was discussed somewhat, but we intend to discuss it a little more intensely. And also, before we start, I can request all of you to keep asking your questions, and you can ask your questions either through WhatsApp or through Super Chat. So, welcome, Robert. Welcome to the Jaipur Dialogues once again.
Good to see you, my friends. Thank you for having me on again.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. So, taking off from what I've just mentioned, what do you think is the general impact of the Ram JanmBhoomi temple coming up in a location which had been claimed earlier by Islam among the Islamist circles?
The outrage is off the charts. It's seismic because this is the kind of response that they are completely unused to getting. All over the world, the leaders of the various nations seem bent on appeasing Islamic supremacists and jihadis. And there's never any pushback. And the Western politicians in particular are well trained, that they know that any kind of response that doesn't give the Muslim leaders exactly what they want is Islamophobic and hateful, and consequently they have to avoid it. Of course, there's nothing really Islamophobic or hateful about standing up for the idea of the equality of rights of all people before the law, and the idea that an illegitimate conquest can be rolled back. There's nothing really anti-Islamic about any of that, but the Islamic groups have made a very skillful public relations, have conducted a very skillful public relations initiative for decades now to make people think that the slightest resistance to any of their demands is racist, bigoted, Islamophobic, and hateful, and consequently must be rejected. And so in this case in particular, of the Ram Mandir, the mosque, what was it? The Babri Mosque was built on the site of the birthplace of Ram and of an earlier Hindu temple, and consequently, that's why, of course, the Muslims wanted to build a mosque there, because they are in a worldwide endeavor to express the victory and supremacy of Islam, always and in every case. And so offers of other land nearby to build a mosque were not received kindly, because the idea is not just that there has to be a mosque there, but it has to be a mosque on that place, because it's a sacred site for Hindus. And so it's a sign of the victory and supremacy of Islam that there's a mosque, that there was a mosque there. And they're appalled and astonished that the government of India actually had the temerity to declare that this was indeed land that belonged by right to the Hindus, as it was an ancient Hindu holy place, and that the mosque was illegitimate. Every other place in the world, this would never have happened. Even in Israel, the Israeli government has never said, not only has the Israeli government never said that the temple, the site, the Temple Mount, the site where the Jewish temple was situated, belongs by right to the Jews. Not only have they not said this, but they have allowed unrestricted, ever since Jerusalem was recaptured and unified in 1967, the Israeli government has said that the Muslims can have unrestricted access to the Temple Mount and can do whatever they want there, while the Jews are restricted to particular times of day that they can go to the Temple Mount. And when they're there, they cannot pray, not even mouthing prayers silently. And if they do, they'll be subject to removal or even arrest by Israeli authorities. Now, this is the most sacred site in Judaism, and yet the Israeli government, the sole Jewish state in the world, refuses to acknowledge that the Jews have any right over that territory. And it's the same thing in Istanbul. In Istanbul, there's the Hagia Sophia, which was the grandest cathedral in the Christian world for almost 1,000 years. It was completed in the year 537, and in 1453, 900 years later, was converted into a mosque on the occasion of the conquest of Constantinople. Now, when the Turkish government, when the Ottoman Empire fell and the Turkish government became secular in the aftermath of World War I, the Ataturk government of secular Turkey in 1934 made Hagia Sophia into a museum. Then in 2020, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, made it into a mosque again. Now, in all these machinations in 2020, when Erdogan made it into a mosque again, Christian leaders around the world were saying it should be a museum, as it has been since 1934. There was not a single Christian leader who said, well, actually, it was a cathedral. It was built as a cathedral, and so it belongs by right to the Christians. None of them dared to say that. They only said it should be a museum and not a mosque. So what happened in India, by contrast, is an extraordinary demonstration of courage and an unprecedented assertion of the rights of non-Muslims over the demands of Muslims. And this is why the response has been so shrill and antagonistic, because the Muslims worldwide are used to getting their way and used to particularly their claims to the holy sites of other peoples being respected as taking precedence over the claims of the other people. But not in India, not in this case. And this is why this is a world historical event, and one that we can only hope will be followed by others like it.
When this whole question was being raised here and the court proceedings were going on, there was an inverted logic that was being used by the Muslim scholars and the advocates on the Muslim sides. And they were saying that Islam says that you cannot pray in a place which has been obtained by force or which is a disputed place. Therefore, it cannot be a temple.
Wait a minute. You cannot I'm not sure I understand this. Can Muslims or non-Muslims not pray in a place obtained by force? Are the Muslims dictating to the non-Muslims and saying the Hindus can't pray there because it was supposedly obtained by force?
No. They're saying that in the Islamic theology, it is not permitted to pray in a disputed place. Otherwise, the prayer to Allah will not be accepted. Therefore, and because we have been praying there, therefore, it cannot be a temple because we have been praying there.
Because they've been praying there and they could not have obtained it by force because that's forbidden in Islam. And consequently, the Hindu argument that it was a temple that was destroyed to build the mosque is false. Is that the idea?
Yes, that's the idea. That's
okay.
Exactly the
well, that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. I'm just astonished, really. I haven't heard this before. But of course, we know that
this is recorded apparently in the Fatawa Alamgiri.
That's just ridiculous. It's absolutely baseless. In the first place, there are so many mosques that are on land obtained by force, and so are they saying that all those lands all those mosques are illegitimate? this is clearly an example of deception, that that Muslims say things that are designed to confuse and mislead unbelievers in order to gain an advantage for Islam. In this case, it's quite clear what the purpose is. The idea is to uh, disarm the Hindu argument by claiming that it was not a triumphal mosque, not built on Hindu land, that apparently the Hindus then therefore must have abandoned it. And so on this unclaimed site, the Muslims randomly built a mosque. This is just astonishing. You think about the Temple Mount. How did the Muslims get there? The idea was that Muhammad is supposed to have been transported to paradise there after he was flown there on a winged white horse with a human head or a donkey. And the Muslims then conquered the territory and claimed the Temple Mount. How did they get into Istanbul? In Istanbul, at that time, Constantinople, on May 29th, 1453, the Christians in the city, when the Muslims broke through the gates, took refuge in the cathedral. And the Muslims came into the cathedral and started murdering people wholesale. And the blood ran down the aisles of the cathedral. And it was on the blood-soaked ground that the imam was ordered by the Sultan to go to the pulpit and mount the pulpit and say there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet, thereby making the cathedral into a mosque. And so if that's the quintessential example in the West. If a mosque cannot be, if Muslims can't pray in a place obtained by force, then Erdogan needs to vacate Hagia Sophia today and give it back to the Christians for a cathedral, because that quite obviously obtained by force and attested by Islamic sources who proudly wrote about the conquest, just as there's so many Muslim sources in India that write proudly about the Muslim conquest of India and the destruction of temples, and how the idols were broken into pieces and the pieces laid at the doorways of the mosques so that the people would trample the Hindu gods as they walked into the mosques. That's force. There's no way around this. And so to say such a thing, whatever Fatwa Alamgiri says, it's clearly something designed to fool unbelievers and doesn't have any genuine basis in Islamic theology or practice.
All right. And actually, what is happening in India is, of course, that nobody is buying their argument. The law is very much in favor of the Hindus also, because there is the Hindu law that is attested both by the Privy Council before independence, as well as by the Supreme Court of India, says that the deity, once a place is dedicated to a deity, and the deity is invited to reside in a murti, that is loosely called idol, then whatever may happen to the murti, the deity remains there, because the deity is formless. And you may destroy the murti, you may spirit it away, you may break it, or whatever you may do to the murti. The deity will not go away, the place remains with the deity. So,
So the
because
mosque
of
never.
that law, we are now claiming almost every place that we have a record of. And that is making them go absolutely ballistic.
Yeah, of course, because I'm sure that it would be hard to find mosques in India that aren't built on the site of Hindu temples, because this is a concerted effort by Muslims in India and elsewhere around the world to assert the victory of Islam by appropriating the sacred sites of other peoples. And so they understand that a dangerous precedent, as far as they're concerned, has been set. That if this mosque, it can be destroyed and the Hindu temple rebuilt, because it was originally a Hindu temple that was violently seized and the land stolen by the Muslims. And that if this can be reversed, then there are likely hundreds, maybe thousands of similar sites where the same thing could happen. And so they see that this could have catastrophic consequences as far as they're concerned. You know, not only is it said, Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, said Islam must dominate and not be dominated, but also in Islam is the idea that what they have, they hold. That a land that belonged to the Muslims at any point belongs by right to the Muslims forever. This is why Israel drives them crazy, because it's on what they consider to be Islamic land. And so it's the same thing. It'll be the same thing with these temples, that the land is considered to belong to the Muslims because the Muslims were there at any point. And like I said, for the most part, infidels have not fought back against this. This is something new in the history of the world. And so they don't know how to deal with it.
Right. In any case, all land belongs to Allah. So that is the basic maxim.
Coming into that aspect of,
Vibhuti
Robert,
ji,
you mentioned
you want
about
to say
the
something?
PR battle. They are winning the PR battle and using tools of freedoms to assert their own position. So can't handle the truth, as the statement goes. But before I come back to my question, I wanted to congratulate you, because Gemini AI has ruled Robert Spencer's video about survival of West as harmful and discriminatory. So congratulations, Robert, that your attempt to protect the West has been deemed as hateful and discriminatory. So
Yes.
that's this is the same Gemini AI that has defended, unfortunately, the pedophiles. So we are living in a very strange world right now,
Yes.
thanks to very strange world. But I wanted to ask you, since we are talking about Ram Mandir and the other elements, but it's very important that how the Biden regime, has restored the policy of what Trump brought in, claiming Israeli settlements in Judea and Samaria as illegitimate. This is a very interesting juxtaposition. Ram Mandir and how the Israel and their entire temple, our rights, the minority rights, are totally thrown out of the window by the play of Islam using our tools against us. That's pretty marvelous. I mean, sometimes you have to give your enemy credit how they abuse your process against you. So
Yes.
as we have talked at length about Ram Mandir in many programs, but I wanted to come on the subject matter of this one. As you rightly said, thousands of temples in India, thousands of examples in all over the world where they have imposed their will. Why still we have seen this happening in France, in Germany, where in the UK Parliament, where all the symbols of Islamic supremacy and the chanting of their verses are being allowed and nobody is saying a word. Has the West capitulated, or
Yes.
they are just trying to figure out what to do? That's a thought, because India is the only one which is rising against the atrocities, and people like you and I get branded.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, it's certainly true that the people who have the power in the West are completely on the other side, and they have completely capitulated. And so Google, with its Gemini AI, they just see my name and they say, oh, this is bad. The video in question, we were discussing my book about the Byzantine Empire, which is a historical work, and it has relevance for the contemporary situation, but the idea that it's spreading any kind of hatred and discrimination is ridiculous, except from the standpoint that anything that is considered to be in opposition to the global jihad and to the left's agenda is considered to be hateful and discriminatory. And those people have power all over the West, all over the world, really. And so it's no surprise that they would be on the side of the jihadis, because the international left loves the jihad. Now, this is a very strange thing people don't understand because they think, well, the left is all for all this strange business like transgenderism and so on, and the Muslims are against all that, so how can they ally together? And the key is that Islam lends itself to authoritarianism, that the international left wants to destroy governments that are based on freedom and destroy the idea of popular rule, of the people choosing their own leaders in free elections and having the ability to dissent in free societies. The international left is authoritarian and wants to establish an international authoritarian state, or maybe a few of them. Now, the Muslims teach that you should obey the ruler. Muhammad said in a famous hadith, obey your ruler even if he is an Ethiopian with a head like a raisin. And this is often quoted to show that Muhammad was racist, and that's fair enough. That's a reasonable argument. But it's also important to note that he is saying, obey your ruler even if he is the most outlandish, unbelievable person you can think of. So in other words, obey your ruler no matter what. And that lends itself to accepting authoritarian rule. There are no democracies, there are no republics in the Islamic world. There are Islamic republics, but they don't have the kind of free society that a non-Muslim republic has. And so the left loves Islam because it inculcates the kind of authoritarianism that the left wants in society. And this is why it hates all the other religions, but it loves Islam. I see somebody asking, what's the title of my Byzantine book? And so I have to answer that. Empire of God, How the Byzantines Saved Civilization. It's available now at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, wherever there are books sold. It should be there at least until Google gets it, but you can still get it today.
They might put the buyer beware sign there.
Yes. Used to be there was a warning for parents, for advisors, that there was language or content that a parent wouldn't necessarily want his child to have access to. And so it's going to be the same thing now. Warning, this book teaches about freedom. To be careful.
But freedom of speech and expression actually includes freedom to ban, freedom to revile, and freedom to say that you are a fascist.
Indeed. This is what they're at war against.
Talking about the war, I will ask a follow-up on that. You know, this year, 2024, is remarkably vital, I think, for the entire world system that we see it, especially India and the United States, because India is going to go for election in April, May time frame. And it's in April now, right? So, and election results will come in the month of May. US is in November. So you are seeing how the scene is hotting up here. In the US, you have seen Madam Tlaib, openly declaring to vote against Biden, because his war policies are hurting them. So I'm seeing those people trying to force the US government into taking a position vis-a-vis Israel and the Palestinians and Arabs and Hamas all on one side, Israel on the other. Do you see a electoral play by Democrats, particularly towards doing something about ignoring Israel's needs and demands and their necessities over the voting might and money might of that these people bring?
Very much so. Yeah, the Biden regime is in a very difficult position because Congresswoman Tlaib has threatened that they will receive not a single vote from Muslims, not a one, if Biden or whoever's running the regime actually does not pressure Israel to stop fighting. Nihad Awad of the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is an organization that's very powerful and influential in the US and has ties to Hamas, he has said to Biden, you won't receive a single vote from Muslims in November, not in any of the most important states, if you don't push Israel for a ceasefire. A ceasefire sounds like something reasonable people should support, but actually, in this case, Israel has vowed to destroy Hamas. A ceasefire would allow Hamas to regroup and survive. And so the last thing that there should be is a ceasefire, but this is why Biden's regime is being pressured so hard. And they are trying to play both sides because they want to keep the leftist Jews, who constitute the majority of Jews in the United States. They want to keep them voting for them, but they also want to keep the Muslims voting for them. And so he's trying to abandon and betray Israel as much as possible while not completely alienating the Jewish voters. And so the main thing that he's done is give money to Hamas. And you might be surprised and say, where did Biden give money to Hamas? He gave it in two ways. One was right after October 7th, he went to Israel and met with Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel. And he pledged his support to the Israelis in their war effort. But at the same time, he said he was giving $100 million to Gaza. And he said that this was for humanitarian aid. Now, he warned Hamas that they shouldn't take this money or there would be negative consequences. But of course, there was no other group that could get that money except Hamas. Hamas controls Gaza. And if you lived in Gaza and were not Hamas, and I walk up to you and hand you $100 million, Hamas will knock on your door an hour later and take the $100 million. There is no group that can stand up to Hamas in Gaza. And so that was one way that Biden gave $100 million to Hamas. Then, not long after that, he unfroze $10 billion for the Islamic Republic of Iran. There were billions of dollars in frozen assets. After the fall of the Shah of Iran in 1979, the Khomeini regime established the Islamic Republic, and it was rather sudden. And the Shah had some transactions, some business transactions, taking place in process in the United States for weapons and for other things. And so the American government had some of his money and didn't want to give it to the Ayatollah Khomeini. So they held the funds and were waiting for a better regime in Iran that they could return the money to. But Biden just took $10 billion out of that fund, out of that money, and gave it to the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic of Iran is the chief financier of Hamas. So this also, it was funding Hamas' war against Israel. So we have the peculiar position of the United States saying it supports Israel while funding Israel's enemies and those that have vowed to destroy Israel. And this is because the Biden regime is trying to play both sides and keep the supporters of Israel happy while also quieting the Muslim leaders who hate Israel and want to see the American government betray it. And unfortunately, they had not been pleased and keep on pressing, as we know Muslims do the world over, for more concessions. And so I believe you mentioned, the audio went out a little bit, but I believe you mentioned how Blinken has just said, the Secretary of State, that the settlements are illegitimate, reversing the Trump acknowledgement that they were legal. And it was also Reagan and other presidents before Trump who said they were perfectly legal. They are on land that belongs by right to Israel. There's nothing illegal about them. But now the Biden regime has gone back to the Obama policy of claiming that they're illegal. And they're going to continue to pressure Israel so that Israel will allow Hamas to survive, which is what the Hamas-tied groups in the United States, such as the Council on American Islamic Relations, are trying to bring about.
Oh, well, that always happens. Muslims want ceasefire as the Hudaybiyah strategy, isn't it? Otherwise, if they are winning, they would never agree to any ceasefire.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch all that. The audio is a little...
I said ceasefire for Muslims is the classic Hudaybiyah strategy.
Exactly.
The Treaty of
exactly.
Hudaybiyah.
Hudaybiyah is the treaty that Muhammad concluded with the Quraysh tribe when he couldn't defeat them. And he agreed to all kinds of disadvantageous stipulations. His followers were enraged. And finally, he told them that if they would be patient, they would see a great victory. And he broke the treaty when he no longer needed it, and the Muslims were stronger. This is the legal basis in Islamic law for all treaty making. And no American leader and no non-Muslim leader anywhere that I know of has ever acknowledged it. That the Treaty of Hudaybiyah makes it very clear you shouldn't get into treaties with Muslims because they will not honor them and only use them to gain time and gain strength to fight again more effectively. And so they shouldn't be concluding treaties at all. But they don't know anything about this in Washington, and they don't care.
One more thing about this Ram JanmBhoomi. Okay, we know that there is an outrage and it is a seismic event as far as the Islamists are concerned, and they're very worried, rightly so. How is the Western media and the Western establishments taking this?
The Western media is completely corrupt and sold out to the left and the Islamic groups. And so consequently, when they see the story of a mosque being demolished and a temple being built on the site of it, then they don't tell people that there was a previous temple that the Muslims demolished to build their mosque on the site, or that it is a sacred site to Hindus. They only tell readers in the West that the wicked Hindu government of India that was friendly with Trump and so on, and thus is part of everything that's evil in the world. It demolished a mosque out of its inveterate Islamophobia and has now built a Hindu temple on the site. And this kind of partial, incomplete, and misleading reporting is consistent across the board, not just in regard to India, but also in regard to Israel and anywhere really where Muslims and non-Muslims are fighting. The media only gives the Islamic side of the story and leaves out important aspects.
Right. Vibhuti Ji?
Yeah, I will like to hear more about the impending things that are happening.
Just 1 minute. Sorry to interrupt. May I request the viewers to please ask your questions, reminding you once again, either through WhatsApp or through Super Chat.
Yeah, my thing was something like this, that you are seeing an all-out war being launched by the Islamic groups, the unholy alliance of the leftists and Islamists doing that, including the fact that they chased Jewish restaurants, supermarkets, stocking Jewish products, Israeli products, Jewish products. How are we actually prepared to handle that? Because they resort to violence at the drop of a hat. While we await the judicial process to play out. And that's something which I noticed that these people take advantage of. In India particularly, I'm very happy to know and see that Indians have by and large are ready for that. No toolkit operator is left alone. The moment he says or does something, there is a response to that. No reaction, response to that. But the West is not ready. How are we going to deal with that scenario is a real challenge, because restaurants, supermarkets, everything. I mean, so much so that I think there was a, even this guy, famous comedian, was attacked yesterday in Manhattan for his position of supporting Israel. Who am I talking about here? That name is missing out, right?
Seinfeld.
Yes, Seinfeld. Yeah, that's exact. Thank you. Seinfeld was attacked. So they are targeting you and I individually, basically to silence the remaining people who can potentially raise their voice. That if they can silence Robert, Vibhuti, and Sanjay and Jaipur Dialogue, hey, everybody else will have to shut up after that. That's the point which I'm, concerned about.
Mhm. Well, the idea is to terrorize people into submission. The Quran says that you should make ready the steeds of war in order to strike terror in the enemies of Allah. That's chapter 8, verse 60. And so that is considered by Muslims to be the manual for living. And so when they are confronted with opposition, they think they need to terrorize the opposition into submission. And so yelling at Seinfeld and accusing him of genocide when he's just a comedian, and going to restaurants and supermarkets and so on and demanding that, accusing them of supporting genocide and demanding that they not carry Israeli products or not support Israel and so on. This is all designed to make people afraid, to strike terror into their hearts so that they will think, I better not say anything publicly or do anything publicly in support of Israel or in support of the construction of the temple in India or anything that opposes Islam and jihad, because then they'll come after me. And that's the idea. They want everyone afraid so that we will submit. And what drives them crazy, the reason why then you read about me on the AI and you hear about how terrible a person I am, is because I won't submit. And so the things that they have used that work on other people, they don't work on us. So they have to try to step up the campaign and make it so that you have people afraid of offering any support or afraid of having any association with us at all. You see, that AI thing came in the context of my doing an interview with somebody who doesn't ordinarily discuss these things. And so now she'll think twice, that's the idea, before she ventures into this territory again. And it's the same thing across the board. They want to make anyone who dares to get out of line too afraid to get out of line in the future.
Sanjay ji.
Okay, so how is it that the entire Western Christian clergy and the Christian community at large is keeping quiet at the genocide which is happening in plain sight in Africa?
I'll tell you something. 10 years ago, over 11 years ago now, I was invited to speak at a Catholic conference in Massachusetts. And before the conference happened, before I spoke, the bishop of that area in Massachusetts, I think it was Worcester, Robert McManus, he announced that I would be disinvited and not allowed to speak at this Catholic conference because I was going to be speaking about the persecution of Christians by Muslims. And so he wrote in his message, Bishop McManus, that if I spoke about the Muslim persecution of Christians, it would harm the dialogue that the Christian leaders were having with Muslims. And they were making so much wonderful progress with this dialogue that they didn't want to talk about persecution of Christians. And so I didn't speak, and that was that. Now consider the implications of this, that there was no discussion at this Catholic conference in Massachusetts of the Muslim persecution of Christians. I'm sure there hasn't been any discussion of it since then either. And the Catholic Church in general, and other churches as well, they shy away from discussing this because they are having dialogue meetings. They have meetings with Muslim leaders, and they're very pleasant meetings, and friendly meetings, and they think they're making progress. And so they don't want to jeopardize that by bringing up unpleasant matters such as the persecution of Christians in Nigeria, even though it's reaching genocidal proportions. Now, the problem here is that the dialogue that they're having has not saved one Christian from being persecuted, has not kept one Christian from being killed, has not prevented one church from being burned. In Nigeria, the Muslims are advancing without any opposition. The government is on their side. And the Christian leaders in the West are too afraid of jeopardizing their dialogue to do anything about it, or say anything about it, even though their dialogue has not done one thing to alleviate the plight of the Christians in Nigeria. So that story, I hope, makes clear why the Christian leaders remain silent. They have been cowed and manipulated into carrying out this dialogue with the Muslim leaders. And they think that it will make progress. And as a sacrifice in pursuing this dialogue, they have voluntarily declined to speak about the Muslim persecution of Christians. And so consequently, that persecution continues. The dialogue doesn't stop it, but the Christian leaders are foolish enough to think that they're making progress.
but there is there are sporadic.
Let me have a follow-up. Let me have a
Sure,
follow-up
go
on
ahead,
this.
go ahead.
Just a follow-up.
Yeah.
Is this also due to some kind of an racist attitude that they couldn't care too much for the blacks,
I don't
even if
know.
they were Christians?
I think so, because these are leaders who have been very vocal about rejecting racism and condemning it. Now, of course, that doesn't mean human beings are not always consistent. And it's certainly true that were it happening in Europe, I think the reaction would be quite different. And so it's possible, but I think that it is much more likely that they're so enamored of the idea of dialogue that they think that it's worth being quiet about the persecution of Christians in exchange for good relationships with Muslim leaders. I mean, the worst offender in this is the Pope, Pope Francis, who is pathetic in his fondness for Ahmed At-Tayyib, the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar. And you see them in photographs, and At-Tayyib is very solemn and serious. And Pope Francis is grinning and thrilled to be in his presence, and it goes up and kisses him and so on. And At-Tayyib has never given him anything except deceptions and saying every religion condemns violence in its name and so on. And yet the Pope is so in love with this idea that he is building some genuine bridge that he allows himself to be fooled.
Well, does Islam ever condemn violence against infidels?
I don't know of any instance in which Islam condemns violence against infidels. Violence against infidels is taught in the Quran in many, many passages. Kill them wherever you find them is 3 times. Chapter 2, verse 191, chapter 4, verse 89, and chapter 9, verse 5, where it says, kill those who associate partners with Allah, kill the mushrikeen with wherever you find them. You have, when you meet the unbelievers, strike the necks in chapter 47, verse 4. You have fight them until persecution is no more and religion is all for Allah in chapter 8, verse 39. It's on and on and on. Violence against unbelievers is justified and exhorted. And so when Muslims commit acts of violence against unbelievers, where are the Muslim voices condemning them? There aren't any, because they know they're just doing what's written in the Quran. A Muslim is not going to condemn somebody acting in accord with what the Quran directs.
And that's exactly what worries me. Like But people can't be so...
Another follow-up on this,
Okay.
just for 1 minute, please excuse me.
Not at all.
Actually, what we find here in India today, that even the common people have started reading Quran thanks to people like you, and we have been able to expose so much of Quranic teachings that nobody has any hesitation in exposing the Quranic teachings, exposing the Hadith, and they talk about it openly. And in spite of all the threats of Sartan se Juda, beheadings, and nothing. It's actually increasing in proportion. It's increasing exponentially. So what's so different in India which we don't have in the West?
It's interesting to note that in the traditional Islamic societies in the old caliphates, it was forbidden for the dhimmi populations to read the Quran. And you can see why, because now when people know what's in it, then they can expose the entire program. And the jihadis are acting in accord with the Quran. And so all the lies about Islam being a religion of peace and so on can be exposed. And so it can't be stopped now. The Quran is readily available on the internet. You can get my translation, the Critical Quran, which is a clear and honest translation, along with commentary that explains how Muslims understand the various passages of the Quran. And so it's harder and harder for the Muslim leaders to take refuge in deception. But in the West, unfortunately, it's still dominant particularly among political leaders, that the people that they're allied with tell them Islam is peace, and they go out and say Islam is peace without making any effort to verify whether this is actually true or not.
My
Last word with
question
Vibhuti
was
Ji.
related to what Sanjay Ji said earlier, is that we can't afford to ignore and we can't claim ignorance. And as rightly mentioned, thanks to technology, we know the truth right now. There is no dispute about knowing the truth. My question again comes back, is that can the world, can the Western leaders remain so apathetic or unconcerned about what is the truth about the whole thing? Don't they know by themselves in the intelligence briefings and so many briefings they have in the house and everywhere else? Why can't they? Are they ignoring? That's my question. Are they ignoring? The lure of something is there. That's what is important. Is, as the saying goes, America is a country of laws. Laws are made by men, and men can be managed. So are they being managed? That's my inquiry here, that they willfully ignored the reality.
Yes. You have to wonder. I wonder all the time when I look at American leaders. Biden, of course, he's hardly there at all. But the Senate, Chuck Schumer, and the Nancy Pelosi, of course, who's retired now, but the other Democrat leaders in the House, retired as Speaker of the House. She's still in the House. But in any case, what is it? Are they stupid or are they evil? And I rather think that they're both, that they are accepting the expressions of goodwill on the part of Muslim leaders uncritically, without examining the situation for themselves. But also, they are internationalists. They are socialist internationalists. And so they don't value the nation state. They don't care that the southern border is open. They don't care that millions of people are coming in here, and that the national character is being diluted and destroyed, because it's not something they value. And so they are all on board with establishing this authoritarian state. This is why we see the Biden regime, for the first time, the first administration in American history, going back to 1789, and the first presidency, or before that, to independence in 1776. There has never before been an American government that has persecuted its enemies as if they were criminals. Never before been a major candidate who was put on trial, was indicted, who could face years in prison. Whatever you may think of Trump, the idea that he's facing all these legal charges is transparently an attempt to essentially work toward criminalizing opposition in the United States. And we've never had this kind of thing in the United States before. And so these people, they are clearly evil and want to destroy the United States as a free society. It's already well along their project in this regard. But of course, it's not over. And so they still may not succeed.
Right. Okay, I think we now need to go to the audience questions. There aren't many, just three of them right now. And if there are any more coming, then we'll welcome them. The first one is Islamic philosophy. This is Computer Vlogs. Says Islamic philosophy, I do as I want, and you also do as I want.
That's right. That's Islamic philosophy. Yes. You must accede to my wishes, and you must put aside your own values and own priorities and own perspective in order to accommodate me. And so in the West, they very skillfully play the victim card. I think not just in the West also, but in India as well, and claim that they are a persecuted minority and consequently deserve special consideration, while never according that kind of consideration to persecuted minorities in majority Muslim states. And this is because the Quran says the Muslims are the best of people. That's chapter 3, verse 110 of the Quran. And the non-believers in chapter 98, verse 6, are the most vile of created beings. And so why should the best of people bend to the will of the most vile of created beings? But certainly the most vile of created beings should bend to the will of the best of people. So it certainly only goes in one direction, and they're unapologetic about that.
Right. Next. Dhruv Mukhopadhyay, Mr. Spencer, in Hollywood and Bollywood, there are the wokes who pretend to be liberal but love Osama. How to deal with them and permanently deter them?
Well, in Hollywood and Bollywood, there are wokes who pretend to be liberal but love Osama because it is liberal to love Osama. They, as I was explaining before, they have the same values. They're socialist internationalists, want to destroy nation states and build an international authoritarian state. And so Osama was an internationalist because the jihad is internationalist. The ummah, the loyalty to the ummah, the Islamic community worldwide, takes precedence over all other loyalties. And so the idea of destroying the nation state and establishing an authoritarian state, Osama and the jihadis share that with the liberals. So it all works together, that they love each other because they have the same values and same goals. How to deter them permanently? Well, we have to stop giving them any money. And so that means turn off all their products and completely reject what they're offering so that they no longer have the wealth to spread their noxious ideas among the population.
Okay. As a follow up, do you think the reforms that MBS is bringing in will have any impact in deterring them, the more devout elements?
Yeah, it's possible, but he's got a very difficult job because he's trying to make Saudi Arabia attractive to foreign investment so that when the world completely turns away from the oil-based economy, Saudi Arabia will not be impoverished, but will have a thriving economy based on other industries. So that's reasonable, but it cannot be done if Islamic law is enforced in its fullness in Saudi Arabia. So he has to roll back enough of Islamic law to make Saudi Arabia attractive to foreign investment, while not rolling back so much that he faces a revolt from the hardliners and is toppled and killed himself. So he's got a very difficult, I'm glad I'm not in his position. He's got a very difficult job.
Okay. Last question. Kapil, radicalization multiplies in prisons. Should there be a special de radicalization program to go through at least here?
Yeah, I'm happy to say there are de-radicalization programs all over the world. The bad news is none of them work, and none of them will ever work. And the reason why they don't work is because they're based on falsehoods. The falsehood that they're based on is the idea that Islam is a religion of peace. And so if you only teach the jihadi the true Islam, he'll give up jihad. Well, in reality, Islam is not a religion of peace. The Quran does not teach peace. And so if you're going to teach a jihadi the Quran, you're only going to reinforce his jihadi views. And this is why radicalization multiplies in prisons, because you take a jihadi and put him in prison, and then he says, I have my rights. I have my religious rights. You have to give me a Quran and let me pray with my Muslim brothers. And so the prison officials, of course, they say, of course, yes, you can do this. And so they teach each other Quran, and they only become more reinforced in their jihadist sentiments. And they come out more hardened jihadis than they were before. And this is true all over the West, particularly in Britain, and they do nothing about it because to do anything about it would be Islamophobia.
Right. Okay. There's one more question that's come. Computer vlogs again. Are the Middle Eastern countries curious about who they were before Islam, or are the Americans interested in knowing about the natives?
Well, it's a big country. There are some who are and some who aren't. And in the Middle East, of course, there are remnants of the people who lived there before Islam. There are very few in many places, although Syria still has a rather sizable Christian population, and so does Egypt. In North Africa, in Algeria, there is a great interest in the Berbers and their language. And that could lead to, if it's followed through, a rejection of Islam that supplanted the language with Arabic and destroyed the Christian religion that was there before the Muslims conquered. So this is possible, but the pre-Islamic populations of all the Middle East are very much on the defensive, and they always face low-level persecution and harassment. So they're not really in a position to affect large-scale cultural change in any of those countries.
Quite right. And with that, we come to the end of the question answer session, and we also come to the end of this dialogue. We'll end the live stream by thanking all the viewers, and thank you so much, Robert and Vibhuti Ji.
Thank you.